Today we are wrapping up our 4-part series on common second act problems, and today we're talking about predictability and how things are just predictable. When your story is predictable, that's a problem, and we're going to talk about what it is, how it happens, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to solve it. Thank you so much for watching. Like if you find value. I really do appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't. I don't like wasting time. Let's jump in. Predictability in a second act is actually much more common than you might think. A lot of times it does get solved in the script stage, but we've all seen the movies, right, where it just feels predictable and like this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And it's not that we know what's going to happen, like we even can figure out how it's going to happen, and that's really where the issue lies, and we don't want that. At its fundamental level, predictability is just when the rules of screenwriting or of storytelling are followed over the principles. So someone starts writing a story and someone else may have told them, hey, here's what you're supposed to do. You do this on this page, you do this on this page, you do this on this page. And that person's like, oh, okay. And then they start writing and like, okay, this happens on this page and this happens on this page. And it just is a train wreck. It's a disaster. Now, what we have to remember is those things that kind of talk about, well, if you do this on this page, this on this page, this on this page, those are story creating tools. They're not storytelling tools. They're there to help you figure out the story. How you tell it, well, that's up to you. But if you're following the story template to tell a story, that's where the problem is. There's story and there's storytelling. And what we're trying to do is make sure our storytelling is not predictable, that it's not boring. So I got to make sure I have a story that works, and those maps can sometimes be really helpful with that. It helps make sure that I've got a story and a functional story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. But if I start trying to write a movie that is following those things exactly, and I'm just kind of going beat by beat the same thing, well, now it's predictable, and now it's boring, and I don't want that. So following those story patterns is actually one of the first reasons of why predictability happens. We start following this thing thinking, ooh, I've got to follow these rules, but that's not what they are. They're there to make sure the story is functional and you've got a full story, but how you tell it is up to you. Now you have to rely on principles. Now you have to rely on craft. Now you have to rely on storytelling tools to be able to tell the story in a good way. And this is where the problem is, because we start thinking, I've got to follow this stuff. You don't. Okay? You're telling the story. So let those things be for story, and we're going to focus on the storytelling side. Another way that predictability starts to occur is when we know as a storyteller, okay, all of this is just leading up to this big fight that's going to happen at the end. And we're like ready for the big fight. And what happens is we start telegraphing what's coming. Here's this, and then they're going to do this, and the bad guy's going to get the upper hand, the good girl's going to get the upper hand, the bad guy's going to get the upper hand, and then they're going to fight in this location because it was planted early on in a really obvious way, and so we know exactly what things are going to happen. We're telegraphing our way to the finale, and that is also not a good option. And it's not that we can't have the two opposites like fight or have it out or have a confrontation at the end. That's not it. The issue with predictability is not knowing what's coming, it's knowing how it's going to unfold. So we have to prevent the how, okay? That's what our task is. If you start having a predictable story, that doesn't mean that the story beats are wrong. You still need those story beats. I still need this confrontation to happen. But if I'm telegraphing it, or if I'm following the rules too much, now it just feels predictable, because now I not just know what's going to happen, I know how it's going to happen, and we want to avoid the how at all costs. So there are some solutions here to solving this problem. We're going to go through them. There are 4 I'm going to give you. Okay, number 1 is to eliminate the obvious solution. So let's say that it might seem like your characters are going to have it out in this one specific location. But what if early on in the movie you destroy the location somehow? Maybe there's a fire or an earthquake and it just gets swallowed up. By destroying the location, now we as the audience are intrigued. Now there's some mystery, because we know there's still going to be a confrontation. We thought it was going to be at this one location, but that location doesn't exist anymore. So where's the location going to be where they duke it out? That is creating a little bit of mystery for us instead of confusion, because we know and we're hopeful that they're going to have a confrontation and the good girl is going to win out, whatever that confrontation is. We are hopeful that's going to happen. And we thought it was going to happen at this place, but they can't do it at that place. So where's it going to happen? Now we have some mystery. So now it doesn't feel as predictable. So eliminate the obvious solution. That's one way to solve predictability. The second way to solve this problem is to write yourself into a corner. Write yourself into a corner where you don't even know how the hero is going to get out. Put the screws to them. We're going to torture them. That's what you're supposed to do to your main characters. Torture them. Make it hard, make it hard, make it hard. And you make it so hard on your character that you're like, I have no idea how they're going to get out of the situation. That's good. Because we might still expect there to be a confrontation at the end, but now we get to a point where we're like, well, I don't even know if they're going to be able to make it to the end. How are they going to get out of this? I'm hoping they get out of it, but it doesn't look like they can get out of it. And if you, the writer, are wrestling with how are they going to get out of it, your audience will wrestle with that too. That's when you also have to do the hard work, though, and solve the problem. But paint your character into a corner. Paint yourself into a corner. How are they going to get out? And you don't even know. And ultimately what you're doing is you are forcing the audience to ask the question with you. They're in a corner. How are they going to get out? How are they going to get out? Now we're not predictable. Now we're not boring, right? Now it's some mystery. What's going to happen? I don't know. I got to watch and find out. And that's a good place for your audience to be. This next trick to solve the problem of predictability is one of my favorite. I really like this one. And it's called a bunch of different things. The phrase that I heard it, and I don't know where I first heard it, is called fighting the giant. So what you do is if you know that your main character and your antagonist is going to have it out, right? You know they're going to have a confrontation at some point. Why not now? Why wait? Fight the giant now. Don't put it off. The audience is expecting this confrontation to happen way at the end. Don't make it way at the end. Make it now. Make it happen. As soon as we have an inkling, ooh, they're going to have it out. Let them have it out. And you might be saying, well, but then my story's over. No, because one of them's going to get the upper hand. They might get away. Something's going to happen, or they're meeting on neutral ground of some kind. One of my favorite scenes of this is actually in the movie Heat. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro's a thief. Al Pacino's a cop. And we know that there is going to be a confrontation at some point in the future. And once we know that, all of a sudden, Al Pacino in his cop car gets in and pulls over Robert De Niro's character. And they go and they sit down and they have this great scene in a diner. They're facing the giant. That's what happened. We were expecting this to happen and it happened. And now we're like, well, now what's going to happen? Now we are interested in what's going to happen because we don't know. That situation doesn't get resolved. One of them leaves. It's not over. And we're like, oh, this is going to be good. But we don't know how it's going to happen. And that makes us intrigued. That makes us curious. Okay, the last one, and this happens a lot. I've seen this so many times. And if you reflect on it, you've probably seen some movies with this too, is that the protagonist, it seems like they don't have a lot to do. The villain's doing a lot. The protagonist isn't doing very much. So we're spending a lot of time with the villain. Or vice versa. The protagonist is doing a lot, but the villain is not really doing much of anything. They're like doing the equivalent of tying their shoes while the protagonist is traveling halfway around the world to find this and find this. And then they get back and, okay, the antagonist has now finished tying their shoes. They weren't doing anything. It's like, what is going on? Like, why is that happening? That seems super predictable. That's super convenient, as if the villain wasn't doing anything. Like, how boring. One of the ways to solve that problem, if you're having something similar to that, one of the ways to solve that problem is just put a pin in your story for a little bit and write the story from your villain's point of view, the antagonist's point of view. What are the things they have to do? And make it hard for them to do those things. They want to do this, so they have to do this, and this, and this. Sometimes when we're writing villains, they're just so simple. It's like, oh, they want to do this, so all they got to do is just go steal the one thing and then turn the key in, and boom, they blow up the bomb. It's like, no, it's got to be harder than that. So you might have to step back and figure out what is going on for the villain. What is the villain doing? Or their protagonist. If the villain's doing a bunch of stuff, we're spending some time with them, and the protagonist hasn't really done anything. It's like, well, I need to figure that out. So sometimes what you have to do is step back and figure out what is the story for this one person that maybe was just kind of a placeholder or just a force or a nebulous force. It's like, no, I need to think about them as more of a real person. And this more often happens with the villain, with the antagonist, than with the protagonist. Because we've thought about the protagonist. They're doing all these things. But the villain, we're just like, oh, they just want to do this, and that's easy for them. Well, if it's easy for them, then why is it easy for them? Make it hard for them. And if we can create a story where we're not sure what either character is doing, now we're really intrigued. We know what we're rooting for. We know ultimately what to expect. We know that there's going to be some confrontation at the end, but we don't know how it's going to happen, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. And that's what you want to do when you're facing this problem of predictability. If you've got something that's predictable, it's not about making things unpredictable. That's even worse. What you want to do, though, is, yeah, I still can maybe figure out, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. But figuring out how that's going to happen, I can't guess that as an audience. And if you can keep your audience guessing about the how, it's not going to be predictable. It's going to be just fine, and you're going to keep them engaged through the whole story. Hopefully this has been helpful to you, and hopefully the series of 4 videos has been helpful to you. And if you found some value, please leave comments, leave questions, all that stuff. I do appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't, hit the bell, all that fun stuff. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. And because you're probably writing and you're probably telling a story, I'll always say it, and I'll say it again. If you're going to tell a story that matters. See you later.